Give us the peace that comes from confidence in your providential powers. Bless our lawmakers. When they feel pessimistic, remind them that you are able to keep them from stumbling or slipping. You are their gracious and merciful God, slow to anger, quick to hear, and ready to rescue. Provide them with shelter for life's storms. And Lord, be a refuge for our military service members and a comfort for the families of the fallen. We pray in your marvelous name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 10, 2026. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Bernie Moreno, a senator from the state of Ohio, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 6644, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 343, H.R. 6644, an act to increase the supply of housing in America and for other purposes.
President.
I recognize the Minority Leader.
Mr. President, Donald Trump's war with Iran grows more confusing and more contradictory by the day. Yesterday, Trump suggested without any explanation that, quote, "I think the war is very complete, pretty much." But this morning, Pete Hegseth stood before the camera and announced that today will be the most intense day of strikes yet. He said that today's activity will, quote, "involve the most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes." Well, which is it? Is the war ending, or are we on the brink of the worst fighting yet? How is it possible that Trump and his cronies can't make it 12 hours without contradicting themselves about this war? It's incredible. Never seen anything like it. A war, serious, putting our soldiers in harm's way, costing billions which should be spent on reducing our costs here overseas, and they don't even have a rationale. They keep contradicting each other and contradicting themselves. Yesterday, President Trump was also asked whether the war is, quote, "very complete," as he said, or is it just at the beginning, as Hegseth says? Well, do you care to guess the president's answer? He said, "I think you could say it's both." He said it's both. He said it's the beginning of building a new country. Those words, by the way, sound a lot like regime change to me, which Trump and others have denied as their goal. Donald Trump is clueless. He has no earthly clue what he is talking about. Something pops into his head, he says it. The next day, something pops into his head that's contradictory, and he says it even though the two things are totally at odds with each other. He doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't care about the soldiers he's put in harm's way. He doesn't care about the billions of dollars we're spending here while people are demanding that he spend them on lowering costs. He can't articulate a plan or a vision because he has no plan or vision. And the statistics show that this is the least popular war at the beginning of it, of any war this country has engaged in. Donald Trump doesn't even seem to know whether or not the country is at war. It's as if he wakes up in the morning and decides right then and there what the plan is going to be. Donald Trump is risking the lives of our troops, the safety of the American people, the stability of the world economy, based on whims, based on feelings, based on contradictions. It's dangerous, it's incompetent. It's sort of like a second grader running this war. Donald Trump's also a liar. He claims that Iranian Tomahawk missiles were responsible for the bombing of an all-girls school that killed 170 people, including many children. Iran doesn't have Tomahawk missiles, Donald Trump. The claim is beyond asinine. Again, he says whatever pops into his head, no matter what the truth is. And we all know he lies, but on something as formidable as this, it's appalling. No other leader in the administration, not even Pete Hegseth, who does whatever Trump wants, is claiming Iranian missiles did this. Trump is lying through his teeth. So, this morning I will be demanding a full, independent, and transparent investigation to get to the bottom of what happened at this school and why so many innocent civilians were tragically killed. There needs to be accountability. Meanwhile, Trump's addiction to chaos is coming back to haunt the United States. The most formidable weapon Iran has right now is the Strait of Hormuz, which today is effectively shut down. And now, thanks to Donald Trump's lack of foresight, Iran has a new, even more radical, even more hostile supreme leader who will not be inclined to give up leverage over the strait. That's the one weapon that Iran has where it can be, unfortunately, be successful. The result? Oil and gas prices are soaring across the world, including here in America. A barrel of Brent crude shot over $100 a barrel yesterday. That got Trump to say his contradictory things to try and bring the price down. It came down a little, but not much. The average price of 1 gallon in the United States is $3.54. That's a 17% increase since the start of the war. Yet Donald Trump says, if it rises, it rises. He says, it doesn't really affect us. What a clueless thing to say. Has Donald Trump ever filled his own tank in his life? Has he any clue of what people go through when the price of gas goes up? Maybe billionaires like him don't have to worry, but for the rest of us, his war with Iran means more inflation in America. And not just in gasoline, but airline tickets will go up because the price of fuel for the airlines. Food prices will go up because of the price of fertilizer. It'll cut across the board, as we've seen before when oil prices go up. Donald Trump is causing chaos in our economy. Finally, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, and Marco Rubio owe the American people some answers. The administration needs to come before Congress and testify in public hearings under oath as to why our troops are fighting and dying in the Middle East. This morning, I'm joining with a group of my colleagues to demand just that they come before Congress and testify in public so they can see what the administration is up to, not up to, and I believe they'll see the mass confusion as they engage in this war. The story from the administration changes by the hour, so what we need are public hearings where the administration testifies under oath. When it comes to sending our service members into harm's way, the American people need to understand why. But right now, they don't even have a why. That needs to change. We need testimony. We're demanding it today. We need accountability. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks.
Mr. President.
I recognize the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, home ownership, that quintessential part of the American dream, has become increasingly unattainable for a lot of Americans. And for younger Americans in particular, the New York Times reports that home prices have surged roughly 50% since the pandemic, and mortgage rates have also risen. A December 2025 article from the New York Post notes, and I quote, "A new bank rate analysis has found that more than 75% of listings nationwide are out of financial reach for a median income family, despite annual earnings hovering just under $80,000. To swing a medium-priced home in 2025, buyers now need to earn roughly $113,000 a year, which is a gap that's turning the starter home dream into a math problem that few can solve," end quote. Let me just repeat that, Mr. President. A gap that's turning the starter home dream into a math problem few can solve. With these kinds of numbers, it's no surprise that the typical age of first-time home buyers has reached an all-time high of age 40. Or that in a recent New York Times poll, 25% of registered voters listed housing as their biggest financial worry, the only category to get more than 20%. That number was even worse for young people, with more than 50% of registered voters between the ages of 18 and 29 putting housing at the top of their financial worry list. Well, Mr. President, this week we're taking action. On the floor this week is the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, a package of bills targeted at making housing more affordable and accessible for hardworking Americans. This bill isn't some new government program that will drive up costs to taxpayers while doing little or nothing to solve housing problems for everyday Americans. No. This bill offers real solutions that will unlock new home construction, drive down prices, and increase the supply of affordable homes. Mr. President, one problem driving up the cost of housing is regulation. Regulations account for roughly 25% of the cost of constructing a new single-family dwelling. And of course, these costs are passed on to the consumer in the form of higher selling prices for new homes. That's why the 21st Century Road to Housing Act takes aim at unnecessary regulation by removing, streamlining, or updating regulations that act as a drag on the supply of affordable housing. And along with removing regulatory barriers, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act focuses on unleashing private sector investment. And, Mr. President, this entire bill has been put together with an emphasis on allowing states and local communities to pursue the housing solutions that work for them. Look at the great diversity of circumstances across rural, suburban, and urban communities, and it should be clear to everyone that one-size-fits-all mandates from Washington are not the solution. Instead, we need to empower states and localities to create the solutions that fit their particular communities. Mr. President, there's a lot more in this bill, from support for veterans and rural communities to increased oversight and accountability for federal housing programs. It's the product of good ideas from both parties and from both houses of Congress. And it's no surprise that it's supported by everyone from the National League of Cities to the National Association of Affordable Housing Leaders and the National Association of Realtors. Mr. President, the inflation crisis that defined the Biden administration is still weighing down a lot of American families. And since taking office last January, Republicans have been focused on making life easier for the American people. We prevented a massive tax hike and put more money in Americans' pockets with the working families' tax cuts. Took aim this January at high prices at the pharmacy counter. And now we're continuing our work on affordability with the 21st Century Road to Housing Act to open the door to affordable homes for hardworking Americans around the country. And we're going to continue to do everything we can to ease the burdens facing Americans and to make life better for the American people. Now, Mr. President, in just a moment, I'm going to proceed to a piece of legislation that we have voted on a number of times already, and that is a bill that would fund the Department of Homeland Security. This is now the 26th day of the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. It follows the Democrat shutdown last fall that went for 43 days of virtually the entire government. This applies to Department of Homeland Security. And so here we are, 25 days into another government shutdown instigated by Democrats because they want, I guess, changes made to the bill, although it's very hard to know what that is because at this point, they refuse even to meet to talk about this. Now, Mr. President, remember how this all began. The Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Bill was negotiated by both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, and it passed out of the House of Representatives. So it comes over here to the Senate, a bill negotiated by Democrats in the Senate, along with our Republican colleagues on our side, and our colleagues in the House of Representatives, and the White House. So we had agreed upon Department of Homeland Security Appropriations bill. And then what happened? Well, the Democrats decided they didn't like that bill anymore, decided to walk away from it, wanted to renegotiate it. After all that negotiation, which included, I might add, reforms that they had requested, specifically as they apply to ICE, including body cameras, $20 million in there for body cameras, de-escalation training, additional oversight of ICE activities, a whole range of things were included in the base bill. It's the bill that we will be voting on later this week again, unless they decide to actually come to the table and negotiate. So it had all that input from Republicans, Democrats, reforms requested by Democrats, passed out of the House, comes over here to be picked up and passed by the Senate. Senate Democrats say, "Oops, sorry, we're not for this anymore. We want to renegotiate." So in that context, the White House and Senate Republicans have made good faith efforts to submit proposals, additional ideas that the Democrats had put on their long wish list, which was about 15 items, some of which were not doable. I mean, there are certain things on there, obviously. Anytime you're trying to negotiate a deal, you're not going to get everything you want, right? Well, the Democrats had a long list of things, demands that they had wanted, and so Republicans agreed to sit down. The White House, to their credit, has submitted now multiple efforts. The most recent one has not been responded to by the Senate Democrats. But what makes this even more stark, Mr. President, is you have now agencies of government with employees who aren't going to get paid that perform important national security functions. Cybersecurity. You think that's not a problem in a dangerous world? Border Patrol. Customs and Border Protection, Border Patrol. They're not getting paid. TSA, people are starting to travel. They're hitting the airport and the lines are getting longer and longer and longer. Coast Guard. FEMA, the agency that responds to disasters around this country and has virtually run out of money, is also part of the bill that the Democrats are holding up. Now, Mr. President, all that is bad enough and frankly shameful if you think about it, given what's at stake for this country and for our national security, for our border security, for security in our communities, for disaster assistance, for our cybersecurity. Those are all things, Mr. President, aren't being funded because of the Democrat shutdown, which is bad in and of itself. What makes it even worse is they are now saying they don't even want to sit down and talk. Overtures were made yesterday to the ranking Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Countless overtures have been made to the Democrat leadership, and they have basically said, sorry, we don't want to talk. So here we are in the 26th day now of a government shutdown instigated by Democrats after they had agreed to the very bill that they are now opposing, and are now opposing even sitting down and talking and negotiating on the things they say they want. Explain that one. Mr. President, this is borderline obnoxious. This is indefensible, it is unjustifiable, and there are American people who are going to hurt as a result of this, and those already who work at these agencies, some 120,000 at one agency alone, that aren't going to get paid, who perform critical security missions for this country. to keep the American people safe. I don't get it. I really don't. You want reforms? Our side, the White House, have been willing to sit down, have given a number of the suggestions the Democrats had, in addition to the things that were in the original bill that they had negotiated and agreed to, which included reforms, like I said, $20 million for body cameras, de-escalation training, oversight of ICE. There have been a number of additional things the White House has been willing to work with the Democrats on. Tom Homan, who's been sort of on the lead in terms of what's going on out there as far as the enforcement issue is concerned, has offered up himself and been willing to talk about some of these requests that Democrats have. But frankly, Mr. President, it's hard to get to a solution when you have one party that refuses to even sit down and talk. This is kind of a new low, really. There are certain things the American people, I think, expect of their elected officials, one of which is to continue the basic functioning of the government, funding government agencies, especially government agencies that have critical national security missions. And what makes it even worse, Mr. President, is we have tried now on countless occasions to buy additional time to allow for the negotiations to continue and to fund those agencies, at least temporarily, until there is a permanent solution in place. We have now twice come down here on the floor and asked for a continuing resolution meaning a funding mechanism that will allow these agencies to function and these employees to get paid until such time as there actually is an agreement. And they have objected to that both times. So we're going to try again. I'm going to move to reconsider, and we will have another opportunity to vote on that proposal, the original proposal negotiated by House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, unless, between now and the time we vote on this, they decide to engage in conversations and discussions, and we do arrive at some agreement that would enable us to actually fund the government and perhaps include some of the things that the Democrats want included. But you can't do that if you're not at the table. You can't do that if it's a one-sided negotiation. And it's pretty clear at this point that's what we're talking about here. There's no question, Mr. President, about, sometimes there is some who's shutting down the government. My impression in this case, at least, is that the Democrats view this as a political issue and some sort of a political winner for them. Otherwise, I can't explain why they won't even sit down at the table and negotiate. It's not about politics, Mr. President. This is people's lives we're talking about. These are jobs, these are livelihoods, these are families. And the mission, which is protecting the American people, keeping this country safe and secure, there is no higher one. You want to shut down Department of Homeland Security, the department that is tasked with defending the homeland. Those people aren't getting paid. Those programs aren't getting funded. And those functions aren't being performed by the people that we asked to do that job. So, Mr. President, I'm going to move to proceed to calendar number 311, H.R. 7147.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 311, H.R. 7147, an act making further consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 311, H.R. 7147, an act making further consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent the reading of the names be waived,
Without objection.
and I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call in relation to substitute amendment number 4308 to calendar number 343, H.R. 6644.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
I recognize the Majority Whip.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today having just heard the minority leader talk about the fact that the Democrats have now filed 5 new War Powers Act. Let's talk about that act and what it all means and what the Democrats are trying to do here. The War Powers Act was enacted in 1973. It was first used by the Democrats. They first used it in 2010. 2018. So it sat for 45 years, not being used, and then they used it against President Trump in his first term. There have been a total of 11 times the War Powers resolutions have been offered. 8 of them were from Senators Kaine and Senator Sanders, all aimed at President Trump. We defeated one of these last week. So now they come out and they've introduced 5 more. And one of the Senate Democrats' loudest complainers about everything said it is basically symbolic. It's just symbolic what they're doing. These are show votes. We know the record of the Democrats. You know how many they introduced when Obama was president? 0. You know how many they introduced when Biden was president? 0. Because when a Democrat's president, Democrats forget about the War Powers Act, ignore it completely. So what's behind the charade of what the Democrats are doing? Well, let me quote Senator Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, who was the vice presidential nominee when Hillary Clinton ran for president, because it's all about trying to control the Senate floor time. This is what Senator Kaine said earlier this year. He said, "Flood the Senate calendar with privileged motions where I'm taking the floor time away from the Republican Party." That's what this is all about. This isn't about advancing the needs of the nation. It's not about helping people. It's not about protecting Americans. None of that is true. It's about slowing down the Senate, throwing instruments into the gears, all to try to create theater, not to help protect our troops, not to help protect our people, not to make the world safer. Not at all. That's what this is all about, Mr. President. Their hand has been shown. You know, Mr. President, after 47 years of terrorism and torture and tyranny, what we're seeing today that is Iran's murderous leadership, they are dead. Their missiles, their launchers, their production sites, they've been severely damaged. Since the start of the operation, missile attacks from Iran have gone down by 90%. Over 50 of Iran's warships have been sunk. This is a sign of success on behalf of our brave men and women in uniform. Mr. President, for decades, American presidents have pledged Iran would never acquire a nuclear weapon. Thank goodness, Mr. President, we have a president now in the United States, President Donald J. Trump, who kept that promise. The president has acted boldly, he's acted decisively, and this is where so many others have hesitated. What we see is presidential courage and commitment to ensure that Iran will not obtain nuclear weapons. What we've seen is American peace through strength. Iran's a terrorist regime, and that's why today Iran is still terrorizing the world by trying to hold the world's energy supply hostage. This regime is attempting to choke off the shipping of oil through the Straits of Hormuz. In recent days, Iran has attacked oil and gas facilities across the region and has targeted oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Remember, Mr. President, 20% of the world's oil supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I understand why families are worried about the price of energy. I agree absolutely with these families that I talked to this weekend in Wyoming. This weekend, I met with a group of ranchers. We were at the Green River Valley Stock Growers Association meeting. It was in Big Piney. Now, when the price of gasoline goes up, it is a concern to everyone. And not just because of the cost of gas, but also to the cost of food, because it costs more to produce the food when energy prices are higher. So we need to do everything we can to make sure we can get down the price of energy for people not who just drive, but who produce in this nation. And that's why Republicans are taking action now to lessen the pain. Fortunately, America is once again energy dominant. It wasn't that way in the past, when American energy producers were being attacked by the Democrats. Mr. President, Wyoming is America's energy breadbasket, and we are no longer utterly dependent on the Middle East for energy. We were in the past, but not anymore. And that's because of Republican policies that unleashed American energy, and we have it in abundance. America is now the #1 producer of oil in the world. We're setting record numbers for production, almost 14 million barrels of oil every day. That's more than double where we were 15 years ago. Now, with respect to what's happening in the Persian Gulf, there's no questions. Prices are going up, and Republicans are working to bring the gas prices back down quickly. And I believe we're in a strong position to do it because of the energy dominance agenda that we have. At the same time, President Trump is determined to get energy flowing again in the Middle East. He's announced the United States will provide risk insurance to oil tankers in the region. He also announced that the U.S. Navy will escort cargo ships if necessary. You know, this is very similar to what President Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. It worked then, and it's going to work now. The president's dynamic actions are going to get prices back down, and what he is doing in the long run is going to keep prices down. The real loser, of course, of this is what's happening in Iran right now is communist China. China is one of Iran's biggest allies and enablers. It buys most of Iran's oil exports, and it buys them at a discount. It buys them at a discount because it's buying them on the black market. So China's been getting massive amounts of oil from Iran and paying a lower price as a result. What does Iran do? Well, it turns and uses the money to buy Chinese air defense systems and other weapons, as well as fund terrorism. These are the very weapons that our military is destroying and continues to destroy today. Operation Epic Fury is more than just a success against the world's #1 sponsor of terrorism. It is a significant setback for our #1 adversary in the world. President Trump is completely rewriting the global energy map, and he's doing it in America's favor. Our nation needs to continue to produce more energy. That means oil and natural gas. It means coal, and the president's been terrific in signing executive orders on that. It means uranium for nuclear power. We all know, Mr. President, affordable, available, reliable American energy is a source. It's a source of American strength. It's a source of American safety, and it's a source of American prosperity. In the meantime, Congress should take action to lower gas prices for American families. I've introduced legislation to do that. It's called the Pay Less at the Pump Act. It does exactly that. This legislation repeals a harmful tax called the Superfund tax on crude oil. Well, where did this tax come from? Well, the Democrats. $12 billion tax in their 2022 reckless tax and spending bill. Working families have been paying the price ever since. It's unfair. It's what the Democrats want to do. They always want to raise taxes. My bill will lower prices at the pump and lead to more American energy production. Certainly good for my home state of Wyoming. It's good for working families. It's good for our entire nation. Republicans promised to make America safer and more prosperous, and we're going to continue to do both of those things. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
I recognize the Democrat whip.
Mr. President, it was October 11th, 2002, 24 years ago. There was a vote on this Senate floor. I was here. The vote was an important one in the history of this country, and maybe one of the most important votes I ever cast as a member of the Senate. What was the question? The question before the Senate: will we go to war? Are we ready to invade Iraq? President George W. Bush had told us that we needed to do it because Iraq had weapons of mass destruction which could obliterate our allies and friends and eventually threaten the United States. The vote took place about midnight. The floor was full because of the importance of the vote. I remember it well. 23 of us voted no. 1 Republican, Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island, and 22 Democrats. 3 of us who voted no that night are still here, 24 years later. We invaded Iraq. What did we find? No weapons of mass destruction. None. They searched long and hard because the intelligence agencies had told us they were there and a threat to the United States. We stayed in Iraq for year after year after year afterwards. 4,500 American lives were lost in that war in Iraq. I remember going to visit Walter Reed Hospital, meeting the veterans who came back from Iraq. Most of them had lost a limb because of IEDs. There were terrible stories of what they had endured, and some of them had scars from that war that they would never, ever live down. There were many heroes, too, among our military. They did their duty. Their commander-in-chief said, we're going to invade Iraq, and they did. One of those was my colleague in the United States Senate today, Tammy Duckworth, who was a member of the Illinois National Guard, was a helicopter pilot, shot down over Iraq, and suffered serious wounds and injuries as a result. I don't take anything away from the soldiers, the airmen, the sailors, those in the Coast Guard who did their duty. But the reason we had a vote was because we said the American people have to decide whether their sons and daughters will fight this war. This isn't an idea that just comes to us new. This idea is written right here in a little book called The Constitution of the United States. Article 1, the powers of Congress. Section 8, the power to declare war is given to Congress. Now, the senator who just spoke from Wyoming is a friend of mine, but I disagree with what he said. I do believe the American people have a constitutional right to make the decision as to whether their children will be called on to fight a war. That's not too much to ask. We're now engaged in a war, which by definition changes by the day. There have been at least 7 different explanations by this White House as to why we're fighting this war. Yesterday, the President of the United States, in the chaotic manner which has become so typical of him, at one time said it's going to be a very short war in duration, and then later in the day said, we'll make it a longer war, we'll fight to the finish. We don't know where he is on this or so many things. He's an impulsive commander-in-chief. I can't think of a worse combination. That is the reality. So when senators come to the floor and want to have an open debate about the war in Iran, which we're currently engaged in, I'll vote yes every time. I believe the American people have an obligation to step up and make the decision publicly as to whether or not this is going to fight a war that's going to last for a long period of time. The way they do it is through senators and members of the House. To say that any president can take us to war at any time is foolhardy. We learned that in Iraq. We shouldn't have to learn it again in Iran. Mr. President, on a different topic completely. On Sunday, President Trump said he would not sign any legislation until Congress passes a bill that I believe threatens to disenfranchise millions of Americans, to take away their constitutional right to vote. Amidst a war in the Middle East and DHS funding negotiations, the President of the United States now insists that the Save America Act should be our #1 priority, our only priority. He made it clear. Don't let the name of this bill fool you. The Save America Act would not protect our elections. Instead, it would make it more difficult for millions of Americans to vote. So to start with, it is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in the United States. President Trump and his followers would have us believe that is commonplace, and that's why he, quote, lost the election a few years ago. Election officials are required to verify now, under the law, all registered voters' citizenship status. The system works. According to the Conservative Heritage Foundation, and you can look this up online, from 2003 to 2023, 20 years, do you know how many non-American citizens they caught voting in 20 years? 24. 24 people not voting, or ineligible for voting in a 20-year period of time. 20 years, 24 cases. The Save America Act would upend the past 2 decades of successfully secure elections with untested, dangerous limitations on voter registration. Here's how it goes. You want to buy an airline ticket and they ask you for identification? You pull out your driver's license if you have one. Simple. So why shouldn't we ask the same of voters? Well, there are a couple elements you should know. The Save America Act does not allow you to use your driver's license as identification. It doesn't allow you, even if you have a real ID, which you're supposed to have in your driver's license. So the most common form of identification for Americans is ineligible under this new law. You have to prove where you were born. They will accept a couple things, but 3 things they've accepted. One is a passport. Do you have one? Half of Americans don't have a passport. They don't own one. I do, but half of Americans don't. What would it cost for you to make sure you have a passport by the next election in November? $165 fee. That's one of the ways that you can prove you're actually an American, but it's not the only one. There's another one, your birth certificate. Seen it lately? Do you have it in your home? Do you know where to find it? And if you have a birth certificate which says your maiden name is a woman and doesn't say your married name, it doesn't work, it's ineligible. So this notion of proving you're an American citizen turns out to be a lot more complicated when you actually read the proposal which the president is insisting on. Suddenly providing your driver's license, even if real ID compliant, will no longer be enough to register to vote, nor would military IDs be sufficient for service members. Men and women serving actively in the military, sworn to uphold the Constitution, when they go to vote, shows their military ID, and they're told by the election official, wherever it is, sorry, that doesn't qualify. We need a passport or we need a birth certificate. Under this legislation, election officials would accept a limited number of documents, and this could prevent millions of Americans from being eligible to vote in November. Why would the President of the United States be pushing so hard for a bill which will make it more difficult to vote? Because he's worried as hell about the outcomes of this election. He thinks he's going to lose, and he believes that more and more people who have limited access to the identification required by this, who don't own a passport, don't have a birth certificate, are going to be eligible to vote and help his chances of winning the election in November. It is that simple. Tens of millions of married women who took their spouse's last name are going to have to spend the time and the money to obtain an amended birth certificate if your state allows you to have one. Why are we making it so complicated? Excuse me. As I said earlier, the incidence of fraud over the last 20 years, 24 cases of fraud in the United States of non-Americans trying to vote. 24 times in 20 years, the millions and millions of votes has been cast. Making America fill out more paperwork will not secure our elections. This bill only makes it harder for women, members of our military, and seniors to participate in the democratic process. The president says he won't allow us to send any bill to him to be signed into law until we pass this law, denying the right to vote to millions of Americans in November. That's what the whole issue is about. On a different issue, Mr. President, this week the Senate is considering the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, a measure intended to address the affordability crisis by boosting housing supplies and making homes more affordable for Americans. I want to speak to 3 amendments I have filed to that bill and important protections they provide for American taxpayers and consumers. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, spurred by lax lending standards and subprime mortgages that went belly up, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act and created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Excuse me. Dodd-Frank placed guardrails on the financial sector to prevent such a crisis from happening again. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has gutted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau while promoting one industry over that almost exclusively. Which industry is that? The cryptocurrency industry. This administration is playing with fire, dropping lawsuits, hollowing out enforcement, and curtailing investigations into bad actors while cozying up to the crypto donors. If this administration refuses to act, then it is on Congress to provide strong guardrails, protect consumers, and curb corruption. Cryptocurrency is a highly risky, volatile, unpredictable asset. Take the Bitcoin, the gold standard of crypto. It has fallen in value nearly 50% since hitting a record high last October. And it's not just Bitcoin. The total value of the crypto market has dropped from more than $4.2 trillion in October 2025 to $2.36 trillion today. All the gains from last year have been wiped out in investors in that cryptocurrency. Crypto has developed a troubling reputation for fraud, including scams facilitated by crypto ATMs, which disproportionately target senior citizens. In 2025, last year alone, the FBI received more than 12,000 complaints of crypto ATM fraud that resulted in more than $333 million in losses. How does it work? A senior citizen gets a telephone call and is told, you were supposed to show up for jury duty last month and you didn't show up. Did you know there's a warrant out for your arrest? Senior citizen said, I didn't know anything about that. Well, that's a fact, and the warrant is going to be served on you unless you pay your fine. I'll tell you how you can do it and spare yourself the embarrassment. Go to the crypto machine and feed in $10,000 and it'll all go away. The senior citizen, worried that their family is going to learn that they did miss their jury duty or whatever it might be, embarrassed at the prospect of discussing it with their kids, just does that, goes to the crypto machine. Does that happen very often? 12,000 complaints of crypto ATM fraud, $333 million in losses. Seniors convinced by scammers to plug money into the crypto machines. And the president has used crypto to enrich himself and his family. Fresh off returning to the Oval Office for a second term, Donald Trump launched a meme coin that generated more than $280 million in profit. President Trump issued a meme coin that generated more than $280 million in profit since he was reelected as president. And his family's crypto firm, World Liberty Financial, has brought in approximately $1 billion in revenue, the family firm. President Trump's crypto dealings reportedly account for more than 20% of his net worth. In 1 year, President Trump and his family have increased their family fortune to the tune of $1.4 billion, primarily through crypto. My First Amendment would crack down on what some called, quote, the getaway vehicle for criminals. I'm talking about crypto ATMs. You might not know that they're there, but the next time you go to a grocery store and look at an ATM machine, look what's next to it. It's a crypto ATM machine, so you can funnel money in and buy Bitcoins. I'm talking about crypto ATMs that are all over America. 30,000 of them, 30,000 of these machines. If you look at your gas station or grocery store, you're going to see them. They're being used by criminals to cheat Americans, primarily senior citizens, out of their life savings. I've spoken before about how scammers are targeting Americans, impersonating a bank or institution to victim trust, and scamming them into putting their hard-earned money through these crypto ATMs. Because of the untraceable and anonymous nature of crypto, once the victim deposits cash into a crypto ATM, sends it to the scammer's wallet, it is nearly impossible to recover. My amendment would require crypto ATM operators to register with the Treasury Department and report their kiosk locations. It also would require crypto ATM operators to provide mandatory disclosure and fraud warnings, impose daily transaction limits, and provide refunds for customers who are scammed. I've also filed an amendment that would prevent crypto companies from receiving a taxpayer-funded bailout. Imagine, these crypto operations don't pay deposit insurance like banks and savings and loans and others. And when it comes to a crisis like the one we had in 2008, that insurance becomes important in saving those institutions. Currently, crypto is considering asking for that kind of protection without paying any insurance premiums. If and when a crypto crash occurs, American taxpayers should not be the ones on the hook for these crypto ventures that are owned by President Trump and his family. 2 in 3 Americans oppose a government bailout of the crypto industry, while only 9% support one. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk a lot about 80-20 issues. This is a 90-10 issue. There should never be a taxpayer bailout for crypto. I've also raised serious concerns about the Trump administration exposing the retirement accounts of millions of Americans to crypto. And you cannot discuss retirement security in the United States without mentioning Social Security. While the Social Security trust funds can only invest in government bonds, I have filed an amendment to make it explicitly clear that the trust funds cannot currently and can never invest in crypto. Social Security ensures our seniors have food on their table and clothes on their backs. It is backed by U.S. Treasury bonds, the safest asset in the world, because there's a full faith and credit of the United States backing it up. If the trust funds were exposed to the volatility of the crypto market, the financial security under Social Security that our seniors depend on could be pulled out from under them, rising and falling with the swings of this risky asset. Here's the bottom line. Do we want to expose the bedrock promise of Social Security to risky assets like crypto? If your answer is no, I hope you'll support my amendment. It is past time that we put common sense guardrails in place to stop fraud and corruption in the crypto industry. When the Genius Act came up for a vote last year, I voted no because it gave Congress's blessing for President Trump and his family to further enrich themselves with very limited protection for consumers. As Congress considers market structure legislation, I intend to submit these amendments to the bill to fully place meaningful guardrails in this industry. The American consumer is not aware of what's going on with crypto. It's time for them to open their eyes. I yield the floor.
Senator Morgan.
Mr. President, yesterday I rose to explain my opposition to the nomination of Joshua Rudd to be director of the National Security Agency and to lead Cyber Command. During his hearing, General Rudd failed to demonstrate a bare minimum understanding of the constitutional limits on NSA activities. His responses to questions about privacy rights and transparency were deeply troubling. He wouldn't commit to the agency's past policy of not purchasing and using very sensitive location data on Americans. And he wouldn't rule out secretly violating public policies and guardrails on NSA activities. While I admire the nominee's many years of military service, he does not have a background in national signals intelligence activities or cyber operations that would qualify him for this position. Now, he's not the first unqualified nominee. In fact, there are currently no qualified Senate-confirmed officials in charge of cybersecurity. The country faces serious cybersecurity threats. This is truly a five-alarm fire. Yet the president keeps nominating officials to key cybersecurity roles who have less knowledge of the topic than an undergraduate computer science major. General Rudd is the wrong person for the job, and I oppose his nomination. But if the Senate confirms General Rudd, despite his lack of familiarity with basic constitutional principles, it's all the more essential, truly important, that the Senate passes legislation to protect against surveillance abuses. So this morning, I'm going to take just a few minutes to discuss why the government's surveillance activities are dangerously broad, and how Congress can protect the privacy of Americans and protect the security of our country. I intend this morning to talk about three issues that are going to come before senators in the next 3 weeks. Let me repeat that. These three issues will be before senators very shortly. They are Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, surveillance of Americans by ICE, and the dangerous ways that artificial intelligence can be used to surveil American citizens. As most of my colleagues know, there's a section in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, it's Section 702, that expires in just a few weeks. Congress is going to soon debate its reauthorization. Now, I've been doing this for a while, and I know how it usually plays out. Opponents of reforming Section 702 don't want a real debate where members can decide for themselves which reform amendments to support. So what happens is there's an inadequate bill that's brought up, magically shows up a few days before the authorization expires, and members are told, holy Toledo, there's just no time to do anything except pass that bill. And it's always said, if the senators vote for any amendments, the program dies, and terrible things that we don't want to have happen will all happen, and it'll be the senators' fault. So this morning, I want to make sure that people know you shouldn't buy into this. It's a disservice to our constituents and to the constitutional responsibilities we all have. The Senate can have a debate. The Senate can consider amendments on the merit. And one more point I'll return to later, senators should not accept secret interpretations of the legislation they vote on. The country needs to have an open debate about surveillance authorities that directly affect the privacy and constitutional rights of Americans, and it's a debate that shouldn't exclude the American people. So first, let's lay some groundwork for this discussion. The important law is Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It authorizes a warrantless surveillance program. The FISA court approves the overall program, but it doesn't review the individual targets. Picking targets is up to the government. Targets do not have to be suspected terrorists or spies. Anyone the government believes possesses foreign intelligence information is fair game. The targets are supposed to be foreigners, but there are lots of them. The most recent public data was for 2024. Then there were more than 291,000 targets, which is more than triple 10 years before. Some of these targets are going to be talking to Americans, and the communications of Americans are going to be collected by the government. In many cases, these will be law-abiding Americans having perfectly legitimate conversations. Journalists, foreign aid workers, people with families overseas, all could have their communications swept up in the surveillance just because they were talking to somebody outside the country. We don't know exactly how many Americans' communications are swept up by what the government calls incidental collection. That's because the government refuses to tell us. But we know it's large, we know it's increasing. So the question Congress needs to consider is how to target foreign threats while protecting the rights of Americans. Ben Franklin said that those who would sacrifice liberty for security are going to lose both and deserve neither. Smart policies, and something I feel particularly strongly about, Mr. President, give you both. They're not mutually exclusive. Liberty and security, you can have both, but you need smart policies. With that principle in mind, the best way to protect the rights of Americans is to ensure the government can't conduct searches for Americans' private conversations and all that 702 data without a warrant. Smart policies should include certain exceptions to the warrant requirement, and the law should allow for warrantless searches in emergencies. But as a general matter, the government shouldn't be allowed to comb through all that collection of Americans' communications without court oversight. For years, there's been jaw-dropping abuse of these searches, and that's been done especially by the FBI. Some internal administrative changes were made as a result. And 2 years ago, when Congress last reauthorized 702, opponents of reform made a big deal about those changes. But let me give you an example of how the changes in the 2024 reauthorization bill fell short. There's a category of searches that are considered especially sensitive. They include searches for elected officials, presidential appointees, governors, political candidates, American political organizations and the people who lead them, as well as media organizations and journalists. All are involved in this area. So what did the last reauthorization bill do to ensure that the government wasn't abusing its authority by combing through all those communications to look for journalists and governors and senators? The so-called big reform was to require the approval of the deputy FBI director for those sensitive searches. Until 2 months ago, the deputy FBI director was Mr. Dan Bongino. As most of my colleagues know, he's a longtime conspiracy theorist who's frequently called for specious investigations of political opponents. This is the man who the President and the U.S. Senate put in charge of these very sensitive searches. His replacement as deputy director, Andrew Bailey, is another highly partisan election denier who recently directed a raid on a Georgia election office to justify the conspiracy theories of the Trump administration. I don't know about my colleagues, but this so-called reform doesn't make me feel better. I think we're all going to feel worse. But it's even worse than it appears. The FBI has refused to even keep track of all the sensitive searches the deputy director considered. The Inspector General urged the FBI to just put this information into an easy spreadsheet, and they refused to do that. That, Mr. President, is exactly how much the FBI does not want oversight. There are a lot of other reforms desperately needed to 702. Later this week, Mr. President, I will be introducing bipartisan, bicameral legislation to enact critical reforms to government surveillance, including 702. I'm not going through all the reforms today, but this is a bipartisan, bicameral effort, and I especially want to point to a new provision of 702 that urgently needs to be repealed. 2 years ago, during the last reauthorization debacle, something really bad happened. Over in the House, existing surveillance law was changed so that the government could force anybody with access to communications to secretly collect those communications for the government. As I pointed out at the time, that could mean anybody installing or repairing a cable box, anybody who was responsible for a Wi-Fi router. It was a jaw-dropping expansion of authorities that could end up forcing countless ordinary Americans to secretly help the government spy on their fellow citizens. When the provision was introduced, the Biden administration knew it had a problem. This was such a dramatic and disturbing expansion of Section 702 that the Biden Justice Department had to promise it would only use these authorities in certain narrow situations. My colleague from Virginia, who's my seatmate on the committee, acknowledged that the law, as written, is badly flawed, and he vowed to his credit to fix this overbroad provision at the earliest opportunity. Unfortunately, it has not been fixed yet. The Biden administration refused to tell the public when it would use this dangerous, incredibly broad provision. The Trump administration certainly isn't providing any details about it. So Congress isn't having a real informed debate about this staggering provision and whether this vast and dangerous expansion of surveillance is justified. I can tell you my view, this expansion of the government's authority is not justified, and even if it were narrowed to the circumstances the Biden administration described in secret, I believe it's time to get rid of the provision. But here's the other thing. Whatever secret promise the Biden administration made about using these unchecked authorities with restraint, the current administration isn't going to feel bound by that. So whatever the previous administration intended to accomplish with the provision, there's absolutely nothing preventing the current administration from conscripting the cable guy, tax support men and women, and others to secretly spy on Americans. The past 15 years have shown that unless the Congress has an open debate about surveillance, the laws that are passed cannot be assumed to have the support of the American people. That's fundamentally wrong. And right now, the government is relying on secret law with regard to Section 702 of FISA. Now, I already mentioned that the provision that was stuck into the last reauthorization bill could allow the government to force all sorts of people to spy on their neighbors. I've explained the details of how the Biden administration chose to interpret it and how the Trump administration is going to interpret it, and it all is a big secret. Americans have the right to be confused and angry that this is how the government and Congress choose to do business. Now, there's another example of secret law related to Section 702, and it affects the privacy rights of the American people. For years, I've asked various administrations to declassify it. Thus far, they've all refused, although I await a response from DNI Gabbard. I strongly believe this matter should be declassified and that Congress needs to debate it openly before 702 is reauthorized. The fact is, when it's eventually declassified, the American people are going to be stunned that it took so long and that Congress has been debating this authority with insufficient information. Now, I want to briefly explain why our coalition is attaching all these other reforms to a Section 702 bill. The reason is that no matter how concerned the public is about abusive surveillance, trying to address this problem with a piecemeal approach, pushing one specific reform after another, would be impossible. So a comprehensive approach that attaches these reforms to legislation reauthorizing 702 is the most effective way to deal with the problems. So let me stress, if you're concerned about ICE and CBP and how they're collecting information on Americans, even as they terrorize our towns and cities, supporting our surveillance reform legislation is the one way you can do something specific about it now. For example, our bipartisan reform bill takes on an issue I've been working on for years. It's the government's purchase of private information on the American people from one of the sleaziest industries in America, which is the one run by the data brokers. Both ICE and CBP have purchased and used Americans' location data, highly sensitive information that can reveal what medical clinics you go to, what protests you're involved with, and the friends and family you see. The agencies have made various arguments to justify collecting these records, including the false assertion that all Americans actually consented to location data being collected. I want to emphasize that the government in these cases bought records of millions of Americans' movements without any warrant or court oversight whatsoever. If the FBI wants to wiretap just one person's phone or to obtain a week's worth of location information about where that person went from a phone company, the agency would need to go to a judge and justify the surveillance. That's what the Constitution requires. But if the government wants to buy that very same location data about millions of Americans, the government maintains that it doesn't need anything except a credit card. In 2023, it was forced to shut down a program to purchase location data of our people to scrutiny that had been done by the Inspector General and Congress. But last year, there were public reports that it had resumed this dangerous practice, and ICE is currently stonewalling congressional oversight on it. Location data is not the only sensitive information on Americans that the government is purchasing without a warrant. Web browsing information, what websites Americans visit, is obviously very private. Just imagine the government looking over your shoulder all the time when you're using your phone. It's almost equivalent to spying on your thoughts. That's what happens when the government gets together with these sleazy data brokers. And it's not just ICE. The Pentagon, the IRS, Customs, Border Protection, the FBI, the Secret Service, all of them, Mr. President, have purchased Americans' location information or web browsing information. The government's purchase of all this private information ought to be enough. But I want to wrap up by talking about how artificial intelligence could be used on these records. Artificial intelligence tools are designed to comb through enormous data sets, find patterns, and identify behaviors of interest to the government. A few years ago, Americans may have believed that their personal information would be overlooked in an ocean of data. Now we know AI can be looking at everybody. I've been warning for nearly a decade that data available for purchase from companies is just as sensitive as information the government collects directly. Creating AI profiles of Americans based on that data represents a chilling expansion of mass surveillance that must not be allowed. As my colleagues are aware, the Trump administration decided to single out one company over the weekend for punishment because the company didn't want its artificial intelligence tool used for mass surveillance of Americans. The company's CEO said that if the government's purchase of Americans' location, web browsing, and other sensitive data is currently legal, it's only because the law has not yet caught up with the rapidly growing capabilities of AI. That, in a nutshell, is the problem our bipartisan legislation will fix. Update the law to current realities. Stop the government from buying data on Americans from sleazy data brokers. It has to be addressed in a Section 702 reauthorization bill, which Congress will actually consider. Because if legislators don't seize this opportunity, technology will just get further and further ahead of the law, and Americans will rightly have little faith that Congress is interested in protecting their privacy. So now, Mr. President, and with this thought, I'm going to close. We're considering a nominee to be the director of the NSA who refused to answer whether the government needs a warrant to spy on people in the United States. He would not commit to maintaining the NSA's policy of not purchasing location data without a warrant. He wouldn't commit to telling the American people if the NSA violates the policies and guardrails of successive administrations that was made public. This nominee wouldn't even promise to tell the Senate Intelligence Committee about these matters. I'm urging my colleagues to oppose this nomination. But regardless, I'm urging that the issues related to privacy and the rule of law raised by this nomination are considered in comprehensive surveillance reform legislation. I'm part of a bipartisan coalition, and our bipartisan bicameral bill, the Government Surveillance Reform Act, is going to be introduced shortly. I'd be glad to talk to colleagues regardless of their party and philosophy about it, and I urge them to support the legislation, and I yield back.
Senator Morgan.
I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Senator Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to suspend the form.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the roll call vote begin immediately.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Army, to be General Lieutenant General Joshua M. Rudd.
Question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick. Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Reed. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Risch. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Sheehy. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Smith. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Welch. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Capito, Curtis, Ernst, McCormick, Ricketts, Sheehy, Wicker. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Gallego and Wyden. Mr. King, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Marshall, Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Reed, Mr. Reed, aye. Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, aye. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Rounds, aye. Ms. Slotkin, aye. Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Ms. Hassan, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mrs. Hyde Smith, aye. Mr. Marino, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Sanders, no.
Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, no. Ms. Lummis. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, aye. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, no. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Justice. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Husted. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch, no. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Ms. Rosen. Ms. Rosen, aye. Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla, no. Mr. Mullen. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Shaheen. Mr. Shaheen, aye. Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 71, the nays are 29, and the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action. Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
I'm sure they'll be very exciting. I yield the floor.
I feel the excitement. Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.